Hello everybody, my name's Katherine O'Donnell. I've written this novel Slant, and welcome to my reading of the first chapter. And yeah, just to tell you a little bit about this novel. So the first chapter starts in 2015 in Cork North Central constituency. And we're introduced to this character who's in her late middle age, a Cork lesbian called Ro McCarthy. And you'll see in this chapter that she gets very involved in campaigning for the marriage equality issue and really suffers quite a bit of burnout towards the end of the campaigning. So the first chapter, I think if you can bear with the first chapter, you're really into the novel, because what happens after the first chapter is it switches back to 1984. So you get the entire kind of backstory of the young Ro McCarthy, who's undocumented migrant worker in Boston, and coming out, falling in love, getting together with her queer tribe of young dykes and gay boys. And it's 1984, and unfortunately the AIDS crisis is going to hit the group. We see Ro and her friends being very affected by that crisis. She becomes an AIDS activist. We see her in her relationships. And eventually we see her in the 90s move back to Cork, 2015 get involved in the marriage equality campaign, have her breakdown, and go back again to Boston and to the States and kind of pick up the threads. And it's only when she's kind of resolved picking up those threads that we see her sitting down on the shore of Provincetown and beginning to write this novel, Slant. So Slant is told in the first person, in Ro McCarthy's own beautiful Cork accent. So let's see if the pollen will let me do that this morning. It became addictive, the canvassing. I seemed to need to have my nostrils fill with their discomfort, their distaste, their disgust. I didn't go on those rounds of door knocking for the moments when they said, yes, of course, yeah, yes. Most of the moments at the beginning of my long solo months of campaigning were quiet moments. Quiet knock on the door, slow and deep inhalations while waiting for it to be opened, the soft, deferential introduction. I'm looking for a yes vote in the referendum on marriage equality. A shy proffering of a flyer, a gentle offer to answer questions, waiting, watching their caught-off guard embarrassment, waiting to answer their questions. They nodded. They heard you ask for their vote. They took the flyer, they'd no questions. They closed the door. They went back into their homes. I started canvassing months out from the referendum date. I was becoming demented with anxiety. I kept telling my friends, dykes my own age, that they were all going to lose big time, that the only hope was to go knocking on the doors. And my friends didn't want to listen. We don't have enough people, they said. Straight people have to do it too, I said. It's their issue, homophobia. Wherever there's straight people, there's homophobia. They have to work to get rid of it. That's not a great argument, Ro, to win them to our team, they said. And you know right well that they sue if we use the word homophobia. They're not homophobic. They just work against us. My old comrades told me the polls looked good. It looked like it would pass. Do you believe the polls? I asked. Nobody believed the polls. My best friend Chris said, look, Ro, I just can't face it. I've got in a couple of TV box sets to watch for the next few months. All the Agatha Christie's, Miss Marple and Murder, She Wrote. Otherwise, I'm just not turning on the TV. I'm not turning on the radio. I'm not looking at Facebook. We've done enough, Ro. We really have. We stayed standing and we're still here. We kept on going as well as we could, and that's really enough now. We've got to look after ourselves. And sure, you don't believe in marriage anyway. I had an anti-marriage rant to hand, and once I started it, I just couldn't stop. I don't believe the state should give all the goodies and incentives to married couples. I don't think our culture should incessantly promote, romanticise, idealise privilege and sell marriage from the day we're born. And I just see a lot of straight people lying through their teeth, miserable, lonely, fed up, bored and feeling shite, while pretending they live a happily married life. Nobody's even allowed to say they're in a good enough marriage, that on balance, all things considered, it's probably okay, or that they're so institutionalised now they couldn't face changing it. And the people they feel most relaxed and happiest with are their trusted same-gender buddies. And lesbians, we're better than all that. We've loved each other better than that. We have family models and real partnerships that the straights could learn from. I lost them, always, my pals, during that lesbian chauvinist rant. They'd heard it too often from me, and my raw emotion made them uncomfortable. And the young lesbians and gay boys mostly seemed to want it, to get married. They wanted weddings like their siblings had. They wanted to be like their straight parents. They didn't want the extended families of the older dykes, all those complex arrangements to raise children and share houses, loans, savings and pensions. And no one should blame them, the younger lesbians and gays, for wanting those clear and straight lines. They want to belong, Chris said. They want to belong to the whole world. The early weeks on the canvas were fascinating. People said things like, well, the gays are going to get such a land if they get married. It's not all about showy weddings and a big party and loads of presents and a honeymoon in the Maldives. They're going to get a great big land when they realise what marriage is all about. That was one of my favourite openings. I had a few counters. Vote yes then to teach us. A few of them were surprised to find they were talking to a real-life lesbian. Oh, you're the first one I've actually met, except for seeing them on the telly. That you know of, I would reply. More smiles and laughter. Oh, you won't be long not being called gays. You'll be as miserable as the rest of us. And as they were chuckling along, I would say something like, well, you know, lots of lesbians and gay men are in committed relationships for years, decades. They'd like the same choice and same chance to organise their lives and to have their commitment respected. Some people would say they could easily see themselves living with their best friend happily for years. It'd be wonderful. So much easier, but that wasn't the same thing as marriage. Vote yes. Get a divorce and marry your best friend then. That often got a laugh. Who knows what passes between couples, I would say. Many gay men and women say they love each other and want to have the benefits and security of marriage. Why don't you let us? Well, you can't have children. But many of us already have children, and some of them are fine big adults now. The poor children. And that always hurt. I loved when they arrived at the crux, the real nub, when they said, but can't the gays already get a kind of marriage? I thought they could, that there's something already, like civil partnership. They would generally agree that civil partnership was a good enough thing for the gays. And so I would say, in a casual, desultory fashion, you think marriage should be just for a man and woman couple and that the gays should have a lower order civil partnership. They'd invariably say, yes, I suppose so. Well, it makes sense. In a laid-back manner, I would ask, and why'd you think that? And they'd reply, well, because a man, a woman is a natural thing, a better thing. It's always been that way. We were told that it was a better thing. We were told that that's what's good. Society needs men and women to have children. Or best of all, I just think we should be the ones who have marriage. I'd stay quiet then and just gently look at them. Many of them seemed relieved to have sorted it out for themselves. It was the right order. The straights were better, everyone knew that, and the homos just had to accept it. They just hadn't thought much about it or at all before I'd come knocking, but some would look immediately stricken. They were not happy with the assumption of superiority, and their guts were turning over. Others got more expansive, more puffed up. Everything was right with the world. There was an order and a ranking, and they were on top of this particular heap. I'd wave a cheery goodbye, thank them for their time, and leave them with a small leaflet I had written and got printed. I'd say, look, it's a while now to the referendum, but there's a phone number and a website listed on the leaflet. I'm sure you'll be in loads of conversations about this, so if you want to find out any more or settle any arguments, that's a good place to go for genuine information. I had been out so long that straight people around me talked freely about what they really thought about the gays. I was part of the furniture. My older brother and sister and their spouses casually told me that they'd be voting against equal marriage. Of course, my parents were voting no, and all their friends and the neighbours were voting no. In the early weeks of my canvassing, I'd started to talk with them, my mum, my dad, my aunts and uncles, the neighbours around my folks' place who'd watched me grow up. And there wasn't a yes vote among them. which wasn't a surprise. I knew I'd need to have a long lead into the day of the vote in order to change their minds, and so I started the conversations early in the year. But after 3 or 4 weeks of chatting with them and planting seeds as to why they might consider voting yes, I just wasn't able to do any more follow-up. I became incapable of engaging with them. I nodded mutely over the next number of months while they took me aside, individually or in couples, threesomes or gangs of four, to explain to me in a concert of great detail why they were voting no. And they all started in the same way. I mean, do you remember when you were a young one and we found out, you know, like, you're a gay, like? You didn't find out, I told you. Oh, I know, God, you were fierce adamant. Yeah. Like, other people had problems with you then, but I never did. They did not notice my silence. They continued, I always stuck up for you. I mean, people were terrible back then. But sure, it's all grand now. I mean, I never give a toss, like one way or the other. It's all the one to me, but like there has to be some kind of limit. Like, if this goes through, what next? You all hate the church and the clergy, God help us. And now you want to be married there? Sure, it's against church teaching. They can't be forced into that. It's not about getting married in churches. It's only about getting married in a registry office, I'd say. But it won't stop there, will it? What do you mean? I mean, people will want to marry their dogs and cats and all kinds of things. On those occasions, the only way for me to get them to stop talking at me was to say, but you really think you're going to lose? I mean, I think you're going to win. Really? The polls all say we lose, and all the young ones, regardless of their species, are mad for the equal marriage. Do you think the young ones will actually get registered and actually vote? No one was too sure of that happening. There seems to be a lot of people keeping silent, I said, and they agreed. They're probably being afraid of being called homophobic just because they're doing the right thing and because nobody hates the gays. Like, it isn't that at all. Yeah. Do you believe the polls? I asked. Nobody actually believed the polls. In early March, I confessed to Chris that I was getting out canvassing at every opportunity, anxious with the clock ticking down to the referendum date at the end of May. I'm down to 3 night shifts every 10 days, and I can keep it like that until referendum day. I've piled in holidays all around the Easter breaks, so I've extra time to go canvassing. You know, I never take all my holidays and time off in lieu, so management at the home are being decent in leaving me have this time. Gosh, Ro, you're going to be missed by all the residents, Chris said. We were sitting out in her small back garden, waiting for our china mugs of tea to cool, happy with the springing primroses. I miss them too, to be honest. I miss the calm the work brings. I miss my time writing. I miss the regularity of a week of night shifts on and then a whole week off to myself. I miss all the time I have at work in the dead of night to spend over my jotter. But it's easier to manage the anxiety by actually being out on the canvas. Chris indulged me by pretending to listen to the stories I gathered while knocking on doors. I'm telling you, I told her, they think we're not the same, that we're hardwired differently. They don't think very deeply, but just go with the gaze of different feelings. They think we can't understand what marriage is all about. They think we don't know about the hard graft of commitment. They think we're only about sexual desire, and they're freaked out to hear we're raising children. They don't think we fall in love, that we're there for the everyday, the domestic, the mundane, for the detail and duty. Yeah, Chris said. I called into Chris most evenings before, after, or during bouts of canvassing, and she became an unwilling witness to how I was becoming preoccupied, even possessed by times past. I had begun to relive events, episodes, days, and some weeks from my 20s. I relived those times, but now I had the perspective of someone who was over 50, and what I had experienced in my 20s with wonder and joy, I was now reliving as horror. I told Chris that when I was out on the canvas, I could feel again what it felt like to be 20-odd, the rush of that intoxicating cocktail of optimism, gratitude, joy for the love I'd found, the dancing superpowers of being lesbian. I remembered what it had been like to feel the tenderness, craving, passion, lust, risk, vulnerability, hormone highs, and deep satisfaction, the swagger, the fusion of sex and lovemaking, liquid heat. Walking around looking for votes, I felt again that clear grief for the boys of my age lost to AIDS, and the holy cleanliness of the rage that had fueled the resistance. I experienced again the shocking awakening from a gormless naivety to the realisation of how much hate there was for us fags and dykes. How awful it was to have had to witness and endure the banal viciousness my kind were subjected to by those who had so much power over us. In remembering what had happened to me and my friends at the hands of employers, landlords, publicans, doctors, social workers, Gardaí, judges, B&B owners, shopkeepers, taxi drivers, teachers, classmates, bankers, funeral directors, priests, neighbours, relations, siblings, parents, I had this awful experience of receiving the insults, the dismissals, the mocking and degradation, as if for the first time. I tried to tell Chris about the flashbacks. I was hit by that sharp green sensation of meeting the world with an expanded, curious heart like when I was a young one. I had felt then that I was part of a tribe, moving as wind, sometimes salty, sometimes rain-drenched, sometimes howling, playful, tickling a gentle breeze, but always bringing more oxygen and possibility to the world, changing the atmosphere and dappling the light. And as I felt once again all of those times that were already an overlooked history, not remembered enough to be called forgotten, I felt the dissonance of that time with my life as I now lived it. I felt now, once again, and as if for the first time, the shadows looming, the forces threatening my youth. Those forces still lived and still threatened, and now I was getting older. My quiet life, marshalled by contented and daily and seasonal rituals, was again up for grabs by those who wanted to press me down and away from sight. I began to get taken over with memories, disassociated from the present, reliving my past with the hindsight of how very tough those times had been. In my 20s and 30s, a kind of magic shroud, a patina of grace had sheltered and buffered me from feeling the full force of the blows, but now as a woman in her 50s, I felt no such force field. I realised that I had endured cuts and breaks and deep injuries after all. Jenny. The ghost of Jenny walked beside me, although she had been gone for the war. There had been a war, but Jenny had remained safe, and I was so relieved that Jenny had been safe. But I had become a soldier. I really had no choice, and I had stayed standing. Yet on those awful canvases, I realised that I had been wounded repeatedly over decades. I just hadn't taken the time to feel the hurts. I thought a lot of the war might be over now, or maybe it was just a ceasefire, or maybe the battle boom had left me deaf. But I knew now I was one of the walking wounded. Jenny. She would often come to mind, and I was glad that she'd missed the war, that she didn't know what this pain was like, that she was protected in her safe life. Jenny had no need of superpowers. I was haunted by Jenny. I'd forgotten how I'd spun carefully threaded stories to hold the sadness leaking from the pit of my stomach. The fine weave of those threads was now unravelled and wrapped around me. The sticky web of grief confused me. Chris tried to get me to stop canvassing, but I wouldn't. And well, I couldn't. Like I said, I was addicted. "Why don't you just write your way through it like you always do?" she implored. "Go write a story that will contain all the experiences and the feelings." "I'm trying," I kept saying. "I can't, though. I can't write at all." "Maybe that's why you're having this nervous breakdown." "Is that what you'd call it?" I would, yes. She looked at me softly but steadily, her blue eyes forcing me to hold her gaze. "You've got to stop, Ro," she said gently. And in the end, I had to go back there. To the past, to Boston. I can say now that I did have a kind of breakdown of sorts, though I would call it a burnout. It was nothing dramatic, that's not my style. Just I was too exhausted to operate most of the ways that I had of being in the world. I was both stuck and spinning. Stuck and compulsively and exhaustedly spinning. I recovered again and completely after I'd cycled out to Herring Cove, which forms the curving arc that is the tip of Cape Cod. I sat listening to the thump and sizzle of the waves, and I watched that immense optical illusion of the sun setting below the ocean. I knew stars were already in the night skies on the further reaches of that same ocean as it flooded into Cork Harbour. We seem to forget we are in a turning globe and we bury our lives seeking stable forevers. I sat on the beach and read and reread an old postcard from Jenny and the note I had written to her in return, but, as so often, had never sent. I had to start there, with Jenny's words and my reply. I had to pick up and follow those lines, to remember again, to literally remember me, to put my limbs and body, my mind and memory back together again, to begin again. Thank you.